My son and his wife threw a huge Mother's Day party for her mother while making me work in the kitchen. They didn't know I still had access to their smart home system. So when I cut the power during their perfect celebration, I watched from my window as their world went dark. I sipped my tea as chaos erupted in the mansion across the street. They asked me to help in the kitchen, I whispered. So I helped myself to what was rightfully mine instead. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from before we dive into this incredible story of betrayal, justice, and reclaiming what's yours. They decorated every inch of the house in pastel flowers and custom World's Greatest Mom banners. None of them meant for me. Crystal stemware caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows while caterers arranged gourmet appetizers on silver platters. The grand piano played softly in the background, a pianist they'd hired just for Martha, my daughter-in-law's mother. I smoothed down my simple blue dress, the only nice one I still owned, and stood awkwardly near the kitchen entrance. This was once my home, the same home I'd signed over to my son Michael when his wife Camille insisted they needed more space for their growing family. The family that now barely acknowledged my existence. "Helen, there you are." Camille's voice carried that artificial sweetness she reserved for people she needed something from. Her designer dress probably cost more than my monthly pension. "Would you mind helping in the kitchen? The caterers need someone to supervise the dish arrangement." Before I could respond, she turned to Martha, her arms wide for a dramatic embrace. "Mom, you look absolutely stunning. Everyone's waiting to toast you." Martha beamed in her tailored cream pantsuit, freshly styled hair, and diamond earrings I recognized immediately. They were mine. Family heirlooms I thought had been misplaced during the move. I nodded silently and retreated to the kitchen, my hands steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Through the serving window, I watched Michael raise his glass. "To the most incredible mother a family could ask for," he announced proudly, his eyes never drifting toward the kitchen where his actual mother stood, arranging deviled eggs on a platter. "We'd be lost without you, Martha," Camille added, her voice thick with theatrical emotion. "You've taught me everything about being a mother to precious Emma and Liam." My grandchildren, seated at the table in their Sunday best, applauded on cue. They hadn't visited me in months, despite living just across the street. I remembered when I used to bake cookies with them every weekend, before Camille decided I was undermining her parenting. In the kitchen, my fingers brushed against something in my apron pocket. The old USB drive, the one containing backup access to every financial account, property deed, and security system my late husband Richard had meticulously organized before his unexpected heart attack 3 years ago. The same accounts that Michael and Camille thought I was too technologically inept to understand or access. I smiled then, not from joy, but from clarity. A plan was forming, clear as crystal and just as sharp. "Helen, we need more ice," Camille called without looking away from her guests. "Coming right up," I replied softly. "I'll make sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve." I stood in the corner of the kitchen, methodically arranging canapes, while laughter from the dining room washed over me like acid rain. The caterers bustled around, barely acknowledging my presence, just another invisible older woman in an apron. I didn't blame them. When you're taught to disappear, eventually people stop seeing you. "More champagne for the mother of the year," Michael's voice boomed from the other room. I flinched but kept working. My fingers, once adorned with my grandmother's sapphire ring, now gleaming on Camille's right hand, trembled slightly as I placed a sprig of dill on each deviled egg. 3 years ago, after Richard's funeral, things had been different. Michael had hugged me tight, promised I would always have a home with them. "Dad would want us to stick together," he'd said, eyes glistening with what I thought were genuine tears. I believed him. That was my first mistake. Within 6 months, Camille had convinced him I'd be happier in the smaller house across the street. "It's easier to maintain, Helen," she'd explained with practiced concern. "And you'll still be close enough to see the grandkids whenever you want." What she meant was, close enough to babysit on demand, but far enough to be conveniently forgotten. The visits from Emma and Liam dwindled from daily to weekly to monthly, then to holidays only, and now, this mockery of a Mother's Day where I wasn't even seated at the table. Helen! Camille appeared in the doorway, martini in hand. Martha was asking if you still have that banana bread recipe. You know, the one you used to make before your arthritis got so bad. My arthritis was mild at worst. I'd never stopped baking. They'd simply stopped acknowledging my gifts. Last Christmas, I'd left homemade cookies on their doorstep. Later, I found the tin empty in their recycling bin. I'd be happy to write it down for her, I replied evenly. Oh, don't bother. Camille waved dismissively. She's just being polite. You know Martha, published cookbook author and all. I'm sure your recipe is quaint. She disappeared back into the dining room, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and casual cruelty. Through the serving window, I could see Martha holding court, my grandchildren on either side of her. Emma was wearing the locket I'd saved for her 16th birthday, the one that had mysteriously appeared in Martha's Christmas gift to her last year. I turned away, opened the refrigerator, and methodically began arranging the dessert platters. A memory surfaced. Richard sitting at our old kitchen table, showing me how to access our accounts through his secure system. Everyone thinks technology confuses older folks, he'd said with a wink. Sometimes that misconception is our greatest asset. He'd been preparing, I realized now. Not just for his death, but for the possibility that our own son might someday choose money over loyalty. Richard had always been perceptive that way. In the dining room, glasses clinked in another toast to Martha's brilliance. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling something hardening inside me. Not my heart, but my resolve. When I opened them again, I didn't see an old woman reflected in the stainless steel refrigerator. I saw Richard's widow. I saw Emma and Liam's true grandmother. I saw the legal owner of more family assets than Michael and Camille realized still existed. It was time they remembered who I was. That evening, after returning to my small house across the street, they hadn't even asked me to stay for the entire celebration. I sat alone at my kitchen table. The contrast was stark. Their mansion still glowed with festivity while I sipped lukewarm tea in near darkness. But appearances, as Richard always said, can be deceiving. I powered up the old laptop he'd left me, the one Michael had dismissed as outdated junk when helping sort through Richard's belongings. If only he'd known what this particular piece of junk contained. Richard had been something of a technological savant despite his traditional exterior. As a retired cybersecurity specialist, he'd maintained meticulous digital records of everything, and I mean everything, regarding our family's finances, properties, and investments. More importantly, he'd ensured I had backdoor access to all of it. Never let them know how much you understand, he'd advised while teaching me his systems. People underestimate those they believe are dependent on them. I typed in the complex password I'd memorized but never written down, our first date location, the hospital room number where Michael was born, and the latitude-longitude of where Richard had proposed, followed by the fingerprint scan on the ancient-looking USB key. The screen populated with folders, each neatly labeled and organized. I clicked on property assets first. There it was. The house, their house, was still partially in my name. When Michael and Camille had helped me sign over the property, they'd used a quitclaim deed that Richard had intentionally structured with a reversionary interest clause. In simple terms, the property remained partially mine unless specific conditions were met. One of those conditions was maintaining a trust fund for Emma and Liam's education, a fund that appeared to have been systematically drained over the past 2 years, according to the banking records I accessed next. My hands didn't shake as I scrolled through transaction after transaction. Designer clothes, first-class vacations, home renovations, all using money meant for my grandchildren's future. But what truly froze my blood was discovering a second mortgage taken out against the house, with what appeared to be my forged signature. The money had vanished into an account I didn't recognize. I opened Richard's digital safe next, finding scans of all original documents alongside his private notes. If Helen's signature appears on any documents after my death, verify authenticity, created voice recording of Helen's authorization conditions as evidence. Even from beyond the grave, Richard had been protecting me. Further digging revealed more. Camille had incorporated a lifestyle brand called Martha and Me, selling homemaking advice and products, using my recipes, Richard's family photos, and even stories from my life, all repackaged as Martha's wisdom and Camille's heritage. They weren't just stealing my legacy, they were erasing it entirely and selling it back to the world as their own. I sat back, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The hurt was still there, but now something else joined it. Clarity. And with clarity came power. I inserted a second USB drive Richard had prepared, this one labeled Contingency, and found step-by-step instructions for securing what was legally mine. If you're accessing this, Richard's text file began, then someone has betrayed your trust. I'm sorry, my love, but I've made sure you won't be defenseless. The file contained a single button labeled Initiate Protocol. I hesitated for only a moment before clicking it. The next morning, I woke with purpose coursing through my veins. The Initiate Protocol button had triggered a series of automated security measures, transaction alerts, document preservation, and most importantly, appointment scheduling. My inbox contained a confirmation for a meeting with Patricia Winters, Richard's former colleague and one of the city's most formidable estate attorneys. But before legal remedies, I needed evidence. Irrefutable, comprehensive evidence. I dressed carefully that day, choosing clothes that made me appear exactly as they expected. Harmless, frumpy, forgettable. The perfect disguise for what I was about to do. Helen! Just the person I was looking for, Camille chirped when she spotted me at the supermarket. Our chance meeting anything but chance. I'd calculated her Tuesday shopping routine perfectly. Could you watch the kids this afternoon? Martha and I have that charity luncheon. Of course, dear, I answered with practiced meekness. I'd love to see my grandchildren. 3 hours later, I was inside their home, my former home, with full access and the perfect alibi. While Emma and Liam played video games downstairs, I moved methodically through the house, using Richard's specialized USB camera disguised as an ordinary pendant. I photographed my grandmother's jewelry in Camille's drawers. I scanned the forged documents in Michael's office. I recorded the smart home controls Richard had installed, the ones they didn't know I could still access remotely. Most damning of all, I found the draft manuscript for Camille and Martha's upcoming book. Heritage Homemaking, Family Traditions Worth Passing Down. Page after page of my life, my recipes, my stories, all attributed to Martha's rich family history. When Camille breezed back in, cheeks flushed with expensive wine, I was simply Grandmother Helen again, packing up to leave. Did they behave? She asked, barely listening for my response. Perfectly, I answered truthfully. Emma showed me her school project, the family tree one. Camille froze almost imperceptibly. Oh? How nice. Yes, I continued innocently. I was surprised to see it only went back to Martha's side of the family. I would have thought Michael might have mentioned his father's accomplishments. Or mine. Well, you know, Camille said, her laugh brittle. School projects have space limitations. We had to prioritize the more interesting heritage. The dismissal stung, but I simply nodded and gathered my things. That evening, I met with Patricia at her office downtown. Her eyes narrowed as she reviewed the evidence I'd collected. Helen, this is extensive fraud, she said finally, removing her glasses. But proving it will be complicated. They've been very careful. Not careful enough, I replied, pulling out my final piece. Richard's personal journal documenting every financial decision we'd ever made together, including his suspicions about Michael and Camille's intentions before his death. Richard suspected this might happen, I explained. He left contingency plans. Patricia raised an eyebrow, clearly reassessing me. I see where your husband got his meticulous nature, or perhaps it was the other way around. I smiled for the first time in days. We taught each other. Now tell me, what's our first step? We spent the next hour outlining a careful strategy: forensic accounting, title searches, fraud investigation, and most importantly, timing. Nothing would happen immediately. The best revenge, as Richard always said, requires patience. As I left Patricia's office, my phone chimed with a text from Camille. Mother's Day leftovers in our trash if you want them. No sense wasting food. I took a deep breath and typed back, "How thoughtful. I'll be sure to salvage what I can." And in more ways than she could possibly imagine. 2 weeks after Mother's Day, Michael and Camille hosted what they called their annual summer soirée, a garden party for Michael's business associates and Camille's social circle. Once again, I received no formal invitation, but Camille had texted, "We need help with kitchen prep. 3 p.m. sharp. Wear something presentable." I arrived at exactly 3 p.m. wearing a simple but elegant navy dress that Richard had always loved. Camille barely glanced at me before directing me to the kitchen, where caterers were already arranging elaborate appetizers. "Just make sure everything stays organized," she instructed, already turning away. "And please don't try to chat with the guests. This is an important networking event." "Of course, dear," I replied, my voice the perfect blend of submission and invisibility. Behind my eyes, however, Patricia's voice echoed, "Today is just phase 1, small but impactful." The party bloomed across the back garden, champagne flowing, string quartet playing, influential people mingling. Through the kitchen window, I spotted Martha holding court near the fountain, wearing my mother's pearl earrings and bracelet set. At precisely 4:30 p.m., I discreetly pressed a button on my phone. An app Richard had designed years ago, connected to the home automation system he'd installed. One by one, small glitches began. The temperature in the wine coolers suddenly increased, turning expensive vintages tepid. The garden lighting shifted from elegant ambiance to harsh fluorescent, making everyone look sickly. The carefully curated playlist switched from classical strings to my Richard's old jazz collection, music Camille had always despised. Camille rushed to the kitchen, face flushed with embarrassment. "What's happening to the systems? Fix it!" "I'm just the kitchen help, remember?" I said mildly. "Perhaps Michael knows." But Michael was preoccupied with a bigger problem. In the middle of his toast to potential investors, their banking app had sent simultaneous alerts to everyone's phones. All household accounts temporarily frozen due to suspicious activity. Not permanently frozen, that would come later, just enough to create a moment of perfect chaos. "It must be a system error," I heard him explaining nervously to stone-faced investors. "We're extremely liquid, I assure you." Then came the masterstroke. As Camille attempted to pay the caterers with her premium credit card, it declined. Twice. "There must be some mistake," she stammered, face flaming as she fumbled through her wallet for another card. "The bank flagged unusual activity," the catering manager explained loudly. "Something about educational trust funds being misappropriated?" Across the garden, several of Michael's business associates exchanged glances. One of them, a school board member, checked his watch and made a hasty exit. From my corner of the kitchen, I watched it all unfold. The temporary account freeze would resolve itself by morning. This was merely a warning shot. But the whispers among their social circle would linger much longer. As the party disintegrated around them, Camille cornered Michael by the hydrangeas, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "Fix this now." What if people start asking questions about Mom's business? About the book advance? Michael's face went ashen. "Lower your voice," he hissed. "No one knows about those arrangements. But someone did know. Someone they'd relegated to kitchen duty and forgotten could still listen. Someone who had just shown them, with surgical precision, that their carefully constructed facade had vulnerabilities they'd never anticipated. As guests departed early and caterers packed up awkwardly, Martha approached me in the kitchen, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Quite the technical difficulties today," she remarked. I smiled blandly. Mercury must be in retrograde, or perhaps some things are simply coming due. The morning after the disastrous garden party, my doorbell rang with unusual urgency. Through the peephole, I saw Michael pacing on my porch, his normally perfectly coiffed hair disheveled, his jaw tight with barely contained fury. I took a moment to compose myself, setting my tablet to record before opening the door. "Mom," he started without preamble. pushing past me into the living room. "What did you do?" I blinked, the picture of innocent confusion. "I'm not sure what you mean, dear. Is something wrong?" "Don't play dumb," he snapped, then caught himself, running a hand through his hair. "Sorry, I'm stressed. Yesterday was a disaster. The accounts were frozen, the house systems went haywire, and now some of my investors are pulling back." "How terrible," I murmured. "Technology can be so unpredictable." His eyes narrowed. "The thing is, Mom, the bank mentioned something odd when I called. They said the freeze was triggered by you." I settled into my armchair, folding my hands in my lap. "Did they? How strange." "Mom," Michael's voice dropped dangerously low. "What are you doing? Is this about not being invited to the party? Because honestly, we thought we were doing you a favor. Those events are exhausting for someone your age." "My age," I repeated softly. "You know, your father was concerned about how quickly people dismiss the elderly. He always said it was their greatest mistake." Michael's face flushed. "This isn't about Dad. This is about you suddenly interfering in our finances and embarrassing us in front of everyone who matters." "Everyone who matters," I echoed, letting the words hang between us. For a moment, something like shame flickered across his face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "You know what I mean. Look, whatever you think you're doing, it needs to stop. Camille is furious, and frankly, so am I." I rose slowly from my chair and walked to the small secretary desk in the corner. Richard's desk, the one piece of furniture Michael hadn't wanted when dividing our possessions. From the drawer, I removed a single piece of paper. "Do you recognize this, Michael?" He squinted at the document, impatience radiating from him. "Some old legal thing. What about it?" "It's the educational trust you established for Emma and Liam after your father died. The one you promised would remain untouched until their college years." I set it down gently. $3 million, Michael. All gone within 2 years. Where did it go? The color drained from his face. We had investments that required capital. It's being replenished." "With what? The second mortgage you took out on the house? The one with my forged signature?" His silence was damning. "I'm not playing games, Michael. I'm simply protecting what your father and I built, for the real beneficiaries, your children." He stood suddenly, looming over me. "Is this blackmail? Are you threatening me?" I didn't flinch. "No, Michael, this is accountability, and it's just beginning." After he stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, I sat back down and closed my eyes. The confrontation had been necessary but painful. This was my son, my only child, the boy who once brought me dandelions and told me I was his hero. My phone chimed with an incoming text. "Camille, whatever you think you're doing, remember who controls your relationship with your grandchildren." A threat, plain and simple. I took a deep breath and called Patricia. "They've made contact," I told her, "and they've escalated to threatening access to Emma and Liam." "Perfect," Patricia replied, her voice cool and professional. "That gives us grounds for emergency visitation rights during the proceedings. Are you ready for phase 2? I thought of my grandchildren, of Richard's legacy, of the years of dismissal and erasure. "More than ready," I answered. "Let's proceed." Sunlight streamed through the windows of Patricia's corner office as we pored over the forensic accountant's report. 3 weeks had passed since my confrontation with Michael. 3 weeks during which I'd been the perfect picture of a chastened mother, apologizing for any misunderstandings and once again helping in their kitchen when asked. All while Patricia's team had been digging deeper than Michael or Camille could possibly imagine. "The financial fraud is extensive," Patricia said, highlighting sections of the report. "They've systematically drained not just the grandchildren's trust, but also diverted funds from Richard's estate through a series of shell companies." I nodded, feeling strangely calm. "And the book? The Martha and Me brand?" Patricia slid over another folder. "Our intellectual property attorney confirms it's clear plagiarism of your unpublished cookbook manuscript, the one Richard had professionally documented and dated before his death. They've simply repackaged your family recipes and stories as Martha's heritage." On the desk between us sat a mock-up of their book cover. Martha and Camille in a sun-drenched kitchen, surrounded by what were unmistakably my heirloom cooking utensils. The tagline read, "4 generations of wisdom from our family to yours." The advance was substantial, Patricia continued. 6 figures, with a major publicity tour planned for fall. I picked up another document, this one containing transcripts from Martha and Camille's podcast interviews, where they discussed family traditions that were, word for word, stories from my life with Richard. "And that's not all," Patricia said quietly, sliding over one last folder. "Our investigator found something unexpected. Communications between Camille and a real estate developer. They've been discussing converting your former home, the one they're living in, into a boutique hotel once they secure full ownership rights. They're planning to remove your reversionary interest clause by having you declared mentally incompetent." My hand trembled slightly as I read the cold, calculating emails. "Helen needs constant supervision," Camille had written. "She's becoming increasingly confused. Michael's struggling with the inevitable decision about memory care facilities, but we can't delay much longer. Once that's settled, we can move forward with the property transition." Attached was a consultation request to a geriatric psychiatrist containing fabricated symptoms of my supposed decline. "They were going to have me committed," I whispered. Patricia nodded grimly. "And they've started documenting supposed evidence, manufactured incidents of confusion, forgotten appointments that were never actually scheduled." "While I've been baking their cookies and helping in their kitchen," I finished, a cold clarity washing over me. "There's one more thing," Patricia said, hesitation in her voice. "The investigator found substantial transfers to an account in Belize, registered to someone named Bradley Winters." "I don't know any Bradley Winters." "No," Patricia said carefully. "But Camille does. Very well. According to their text messages, Michael appears to be unaware." The final betrayal, then, not just of me, but of Michael as well. I closed the folder and sat back, processing everything. What do we do now? Patricia's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Normally, I'd recommend a measured legal approach, but given their plans to have you declared incompetent, which could happen very quickly once initiated, we need to move decisively." She laid out a comprehensive counterstrike, freezing assets, filing fraud charges, intellectual property injunctions, and most importantly, securing temporary guardianship of Emma and Liam while the financial matters were investigated. "They'll fight back," Patricia warned. "It could get ugly." I thought of Richard, of the legacy he'd worked so hard to build, of my grandchildren being raised by people who saw family as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. "They relegated me to the kitchen," I said finally, my voice steady. "But they forgot that's where I've always been at my strongest." I signed the authorization forms, one after another, feeling the weight of years of silent suffering transform into something powerful, something purifying. "Let justice be served," I said, signing the final document, piping hot. The morning it all came together, I dressed with particular care, a tailored charcoal pantsuit Richard had bought me for our last anniversary, pearls that were actually mine, not the ones now adorning Martha's neck, and a subtle shade of lipstick that made me look polished rather than trying to recapture youth. I wasn't trying to be younger. I was claiming the power of my years. At exactly 9 a.m., as planned, I crossed the street to Michael and Camille's house. They were hosting a brunch for potential investors in Martha and Camille's lifestyle brand, the brand built on my recipes, my stories, my life. Camille answered the door, her smile faltering when she saw me. "Helen, we didn't expect you." "I thought I'd help in the kitchen," I said pleasantly. "Since that's where I belong." She hesitated, then stepped aside with forced graciousness. "Of course. How thoughtful." Inside, their home buzzed with activity. Martha holding court in the living room, surrounded by publishing executives. Michael charming investors near the fireplace. Emma and Liam, my precious grandchildren, dressed like perfect accessories, passing around appetizers made from my recipes. I moved quietly to the kitchen where a catering staff was preparing brunch. I slipped on an apron and began arranging fruit on platters, just another pair of hands. Just invisibly helpful Helen. At 9:30 a.m., right on schedule, the doorbell rang. Through the kitchen doorway, I watched as Michael opened it, his welcoming smile freezing on his face. Patricia stood on the threshold, flanked by 2 other attorneys and a court officer. Behind them, a news van pulled up to the curb, the local station doing a feature on financial elder abuse. A coincidence of timing that Patricia had orchestrated perfectly. "Michael Harrington?" Patricia asked formally. "I'm here to serve you with these documents on behalf of your mother, Helen Harrington." The room fell silent as Michael accepted the thick envelope, his hands visibly shaking. "What is this?" Camille demanded, rushing to his side. "Legal proceedings," Patricia stated calmly, "including federal fraud charges, intellectual property theft allegations, and a petition for emergency temporary guardianship of minors Emma and Liam Harrington during the investigation." Martha stood frozen by the fireplace, her champagne flute suspended midair. One of the publishing executives stepped forward. "What intellectual property theft?" I removed my apron and walked calmly from the kitchen into the living room. My recipes, my family stories, my life, repackaged and sold as Martha's heritage in their upcoming book. The executive blanched. "Is there documentation of this claim?" Patricia nodded. "Extensive, including the original manuscript Mrs. Harrington completed 3 years ago, professionally registered and dated." Camille laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous. Helen is confused. She's been having memory issues." "Actually," I interrupted gently, "I've just completed a full cognitive assessment with 3 independent geriatric specialists." I withdrew the reports from my handbag. Perfect scores across all metrics, dated yesterday. Michael was frantically scanning the legal documents, his face growing paler by the second. "Mom, we can discuss this privately. There's no need for all this." "There's also the matter of the educational trust for the children," Patricia continued, addressing the now completely silent room. $3 million misappropriated over the past 2 years. One of the investors visibly recoiled. "Michael, you told me your children's education was fully secured." It is," Michael stammered. "This is a misunderstanding." "And the second mortgage with the forged signature?" I asked quietly. "Is that also a misunderstanding?" The court officer stepped forward. "We have a warrant to secure financial records and prevent document destruction." Camille's phone buzzed loudly in the silence. She glanced at it, then looked up in horror. "Our accounts? They're all frozen." "Not just your accounts," I said. "The Martha and me corporate accounts as well, and the Belize account for Bradley Winters." Michael's head snapped toward Camille. "Who is Bradley Winters?" The room erupted into chaos, investors backing toward the door, publishing executives huddled in urgent whispers, Martha demanding explanations from a sheet-white Camille. In the midst of it all, Emma and Liam stood confused and frightened. I walked over to them, kneeling to their eye level. "Would you like to come stay with Grandma for a little while?" I asked gently. "I've prepared your old rooms just the way you like them." Emma, my sensitive 12-year-old granddaughter, studied my face. "Are Mom and Dad in trouble?" I chose my words carefully. "They've made some mistakes that need to be corrected, but you two are perfectly safe and loved. That will never change." As Patricia guided us toward the door, I turned back once to see Michael watching me, his expression a complex mix of anger, fear, and just possibly a dawning recognition of consequences long overdue. "You can keep the kitchen," I told him softly as I passed. "I've found my place at the table." The story broke faster than even Patricia had anticipated. By evening, local news led with prominent businessman and influencer wife accused of elder fraud and exploitation. By the next morning, the lifestyle sections of national publications were running headlines like "Martha and Me, Built on Stolen Legacy," and "Family Recipes or Family Theft." I hadn't planned on media attention, but Patricia had been right. Sunlight truly was the best disinfectant. My quiet home transformed overnight. Patricia had arranged for a security detail after the first reporters appeared on my doorstep. Inside, Emma and Liam were settling in, confused and somewhat subdued, but also rediscovering the grandmother who'd been kept at arm's length for too long. "Is this your cookbook?" Emma asked, carefully turning the pages of my original manuscript, the one I'd spent years compiling. "The recipes look like the ones Mom and Grandma Martha are always making on their Instagram." "They are my recipes," I confirmed gently. "From my mother and her mother before her." Emma frowned. "But Martha always says they're from her family in Vermont." "Martha's family is from Florida," I corrected softly. "She's never lived in Vermont." Understanding dawned in my granddaughter's eyes, the first small crack in the carefully constructed narrative she'd been raised with. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from forgotten friends and distant relatives who'd seen the news. Most surprising was a call from Martha's sister Susan, whom I'd met only twice. "I knew something wasn't right," Susan said without preamble when I answered. "Martha never cooked a day in her life before meeting Camille. Suddenly she's a fourth-generation culinary expert. I've been uncomfortable with their whole brand, but I never imagined that they were stealing from me," I finished when she trailed off. "I'm so sorry, Helen. It's unconscionable." Her call was followed by others, former neighbors, Richard's old colleagues, even the editor of a small publishing house who expressed interest in my actual cookbook. Meanwhile, Camille and Martha's carefully curated social media empire was imploding spectacularly. Their joint account, normally featuring perfectly styled food photos and heartwarming family tradition stories, had gone dark after a brief defensive statement claiming misunderstandings that will soon be clarified. But their followers weren't waiting for clarification. Comment sections filled with outrage. "Did you really steal recipes from your mother-in-law and then make her work in the kitchen at parties? I paid for a cooking class to learn heritage techniques that weren't even yours to teach. Unfollowing and returning your cookbook. Elder abuse is disgusting." The #sign Justice for Helen was trending by midday. 3 days into the media storm, I received a text from Michael. "This public spectacle isn't helping anyone. Let's talk privately and resolve this as a family." I showed the message to Patricia, who snorted. "Classic tactic. Once exposure happens, they want privacy." "Should I respond?" I asked. "Not yet," she advised. "Their publisher just pulled the book deal and canceled their contract. Their corporate sponsors are fleeing. Let them sit with the consequences a little longer." That evening, as I tucked Liam into bed, he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are you and Dad fighting forever now?" I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. "Your father and I have a disagreement about how families should treat each other. But nothing changes how much we both love you." He considered this, then said, "Dad always said you were confused about money stuff. But you don't seem confused to me, from the mouths of babes." "Sometimes," I told him, "people find it easier to believe others are confused than to admit they themselves have done something wrong." Later that night, I sat alone in Richard's old study, now reclaimed as my own in my small house across the street. On the desk lay invitations to speak at a conference on elder financial abuse, to contribute to a magazine feature on family legacy, to appear on a morning show to discuss my cookbook. My voice, once silenced and relegated to the kitchen, was now being amplified across platforms I'd never imagined. A notification appeared on my tablet. Camille had finally broken her silence with a lengthy social media post. It began, "As a daughter who only wanted to honor family traditions," and spiraled into carefully crafted victimhood, positioning herself as someone who had merely misunderstood ownership of certain recipes and stories. The comments section told the real story. "But you literally made your mother-in-law work in the kitchen while you took credit for her recipes. You wore her jewelry while making her serve your guests. You can't misunderstand fraud. Return what isn't yours." I closed the tablet, feeling not triumph but a strange, sad clarity. Public exposure hadn't been my goal, but perhaps it was necessary, not just for me, but for others who might recognize their own silent suffering in my story. Tomorrow would bring more developments, more decisions. But tonight, for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of secrets pressing down on me. 1 month after the story broke, I sat across from Michael in Patricia's office, the polished conference table between us like a neutral border. He'd aged years and weeks, his designer clothes now rumpled, dark circles shadowing his eyes, the confident posture replaced by a defensive hunch. No Camille. Their separation had been announced via a terse statement from his attorney 3 days prior. "The forensic accounting is complete," Patricia began, sliding folders across the table. "The full extent of the financial misappropriation has been documented." Michael didn't touch the folders. "I want to see my children." "They're not bargaining chips," I replied quietly. "They're with a tutor this morning, then having lunch with their counselor. This separation has been difficult for them." His jaw tightened. "You took them from their home." "I protected them from a home built on fraud," I corrected. "A home where they were being taught that exploitation is acceptable if it's done to family." Patricia cleared her throat. "Mr. Harrington, your mother has been extremely reasonable given the circumstances. The criminal charges could have been pursued more aggressively." Michael's lawyer, a thin man with nervous hands, nodded slightly. "We appreciate the consideration. My client is prepared to accept the proposed settlement terms." The terms were clear: full restoration of the children's educational trust with interest, return of all my intellectual property rights, my fair share of the house value, and a structured visitation schedule for the children that would gradually normalize as the situation stabilized. "And Camille?" I asked carefully. "Martha?" Michael's face hardened. "Camille is in Belize with Bradley Winters. Martha's seeking a publisher for her memoir about being manipulated by her daughter." A bitter laugh escaped him. "They've both rewritten history to make themselves the victims." I wasn't surprised. People who build their lives on deception rarely find the courage to face truth. "The house will need to be sold," his lawyer added. "The second mortgage and frozen assets have created an untenable financial situation." I nodded, feeling no satisfaction at the confirmation of consequences, only a deep sadness for what could have been. As Michael signed the settlement documents, his pen paused. "I didn't know about all of it," he said softly. "About the book, yes. About the trust fund, partially. But not about Bradley, not about having you declared incompetent." "You knew enough," I replied, not unkindly. "You chose to look away when looking closer would have been inconvenient." He flinched but didn't argue. When the papers were signed and his lawyer had escorted him out, I remained seated, feeling strangely hollow. "Are you all right?" Patricia asked, her professional demeanor softening. "He's still my son," I said simply. She nodded in understanding. "The reconciliation clause remains open. If he completes the financial restoration and the family counseling, you're willing to revisit the relationship. Family should be about more than what we can take from each other." That evening, as Emma and Liam helped me prepare dinner in my kitchen, a simple meal of childhood favorites I'd taught them over the past weeks, my phone chimed with an email notification. The subject line read, "Heritage Reclaimed, a cookbook proposal." The publishing house wanted to release my original manuscript, complete with the true stories of the recipe's origins. They suggested a foreword addressing the recent events, positioning the book as not just recipes, but a testament to the importance of honoring family legacies properly. "What's that, Grandma?" Emma asked, noticing my surprised expression. "An opportunity," I replied, setting the phone aside. "But it can wait until after dinner. Right now, I'm teaching you the secret to your great-grandmother's pie crust." Liam looked up from where he was carefully cutting butter into flour. "Is this another recipe Mom and Martha pretended was theirs?" "It is," I acknowledged. "But now it's being passed to its rightful heirs." As we worked side by side in the warm kitchen, flour dusting the counters, the scent of cinnamon in the air, I thought about consequences. Michael and Camille had lost their false image, their stolen identity, their fabricated brand. Martha had lost her manufactured status and credibility. But what had they really lost? Only what was never truly theirs, what they'd failed to understand, what they might never understand, was that true inheritance isn't found in property deeds or bank accounts. It lives in the gentle press of a rolling pin, guided by a grandmother's hands, in stories told around a kitchen table, in values demonstrated rather than simply declared. As Emma carefully crimped the pie edge using the technique I'd just shown her, her face alight with concentration and pride, I realized that the most important reclamation had nothing to do with money or public vindication. It was this moment, this connection, this truth. 6 months after that fateful Mother's Day, I stood in the center of my new kitchen, morning light streaming through windows that faced east, my deliberate choice to begin each day in sunlight. The renovations had been completed the previous week, transforming the modest house into a home that reflected not luxury but intention. The settlement money had made it possible, but it was never about extravagance. It was about creating space for what mattered. The kitchen island was twice the size of my old one, large enough for Emma and Liam to perch on stools for their weekend visits, large enough for the cookbook photography sessions that had become a regular occurrence, large enough for the small gatherings of women who now came for what we'd jokingly begun calling reclamation sessions. On the wall hung a collection of framed photographs, Richard and me on our wedding day, Emma and Liam covered in flour during their first baking lesson, a recent image of the three of us at the beach. Conspicuously absent were photos of Michael, not from bitterness, but from honesty. Our relationship remained a work in progress, tenuous but not severed. I ran my hand along the counter's edge, feeling its smooth solidity beneath my fingers. On the open shelves stood my grandmother's mixing bowls, my mother's rolling pin, Richard's favorite coffee mug, physical remnants of a lineage that couldn't be stolen, only temporarily misplaced. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my reflections. Today was significant not because of what was ending, but because of what was beginning. I opened the door to find Patricia, no longer in her attorney attire but dressed casually, a tote bag slung over her shoulder. Behind her stood 6 other women, each carrying dishes or bottles of wine. "Ready for this?" Patricia asked, her professional formality long since mellowed into friendship. I nodded, gesturing them inside. The contracts are on the dining table. While the others set up for our celebration lunch, Patricia and I sat at the table, reviewing the final documents that established the Helen Harrington Foundation for Financial Literacy and Elder Dignity. The settlement money that remained after securing my home and the children's education would fund programs teaching older women financial independence, legal rights, and digital literacy. "It's official," Patricia said as I signed the last page. Founder and executive director. A title I'd never imagined for myself, especially not at 67. "The first workshop filled up in 2 days," she added. "Turns out there are many women who recognize their own stories in yours." As we rejoined the others in the kitchen, I was struck by how much had changed. Susan, Martha's sister, and now an unlikely ally, was arranging flowers in a vase. Jennifer from the publishing house was discussing marketing plans for the cookbook with Margot, a retired financial advisor who'd volunteered to lead workshops. Dr. Elaine Chen, the geriatric specialist who'd vouched for my cognitive health, was deep in conversation with Rita, a community organizer who'd helped design the foundation's outreach program. Women who'd been strangers 6 months ago now gathered in my kitchen, a space no longer associated with relegation but with regeneration. "Speech," called Susan as we raised our glasses, "from our founder." I hadn't prepared anything formal, but as I looked around at these faces, some younger, some older, all engaged in this unexpected new chapter, the words came naturally. A year ago, I was asked to help in the kitchen while others celebrated Mother's Day without me. I stood in that kitchen feeling invisible, feeling erased. I paused, letting the memory surface and then recede. Today, I stand in a different kitchen, one that I designed, in a life that I reclaimed. Nods and murmurs of understanding circled the room. But this isn't just about reclaiming what was taken. It's about creating something that never existed before, a community where women support each other's dignity, where we pass down not just recipes and heirlooms, but strength and wisdom. I raised my glass higher, to kitchens where we aren't sent to disappear, but where we gather to emerge. To emergence, they echoed, glasses clinking. After lunch, as we finalized plans for the foundation's launch event, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Liam's school project won first place. He insisted I tell you. He used your pie recipe. A small bridge, tentatively rebuilt. That evening, alone again in my kitchen, I opened my grandmother's recipe box, the original one, not the reproductions Camille had planned to sell, and ran my fingers over the faded handwriting. I'd been thinking about legacy differently lately, about what we pass on and what we leave behind. Some heirlooms could never be displayed or monetized. The quiet dignity of boundaries respected. The firm compassion of accountability offered. The gentle wisdom of knowing when to release and when to reclaim. I selected an index card, its edges soft with decades of handling, and began to write a new recipe, not for food, but for resilience. A recipe I would add to my cookbook's final chapter, titled simply, After the Kitchen. 1 year to the day after that Mother's Day in Camille's kitchen, I stood before a full auditorium at the Women's Financial Empowerment Conference. The applause following my keynote address washed over me like a gentle wave, affirming but not defining. I'd become accustomed to public speaking over the past months, finding my voice stronger than I ever imagined. And that concludes our morning session, the moderator announced. Helen Harrington's cookbook, Reclaimed Kitchen, Recipes and Resilience, is available at our vendor table, with proceeds supporting the Foundation's scholarship program. As the audience dispersed for lunch, a familiar figure approached the stage. Michael, more tentative than I'd ever seen him, waited at the steps. That was quite a speech, he said when I reached him. Thank you for coming, I replied, genuinely surprised. Our interactions over the past year had been limited mostly to arrangements regarding the children. He shifted uncomfortably. Emma insisted. She said I needed to hear what you had to say about legacy. We moved to a quiet corner of the lobby, the awkwardness between us palpable but somehow less brittle than before. I signed the final divorce papers yesterday, he said after a moment. Camille isn't contesting anything. She's remarried already, to Bradley. I nodded, not surprised. And Martha? A rueful smile. Living with them in Belize, her memoir was rejected by 16 publishers. The information brought no satisfaction, only a sense of appropriate consequence. And you? The business? Starting over, smaller office, honest work. He met my eyes directly for the first time. Dad would have been disappointed in what I became. Your father believed in redemption more than perfection, I said quietly. He'd be more concerned with what you're becoming now. Michael swallowed hard, glancing around at the conference center. All this, the foundation, the book, these speeches, it's impressive, Mom. I never thought of you as what? Capable? Influential? More than just your mother and a convenient babysitter? He winced, but didn't deny it. I failed to see you as a complete person. I'm trying to understand how that happened. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. The children will be at my house this weekend, I said. Friday dinner? You could join us if you'd like. His surprise was evident. You'd want that? Want is a complex word, but I believe it's necessary. For them, for you, for me. Family healing happens around tables, not in courtrooms. As Michael walked away, promising to bring dessert on Friday, I felt a weight shifting, not disappearing, but redistributing, becoming bearable in a different way. That evening back home, I prepared for the weekend visit, moving through my kitchen with the easy confidence of someone fully present in her own space. The cookbook sat open on the counter, not just a collection of recipes, but the story of reclaiming dignity after erasure. The final chapter included what had become known as the Harrington Clause, now being considered for state legislation, stronger protections against financial exploitation of elders by family members, with special provisions regarding joint accounts and property transfers. My phone chimed with a text from Emma. Made your lemon cake in homey today. Teacher wants to know if you do a guest lecture. Also, Liam says, can we make pizza on Friday? Love you, Grandma. As I typed my reply, the doorbell rang. A delivery. A large, flat package carefully wrapped. No card, but I didn't need one to recognize Richard's handwriting on the shipping label. Prepared years ago, but only now arriving. Inside was a painting I'd admired on our last anniversary trip together, featuring an elderly woman teaching a young girl to knead bread in a sunlit kitchen. Below it, in Richard's bold script, a note, for your 70th birthday. May you always know the power of your hands to create, to nourish, to build legacy. What flows from your kitchen feeds more than bodies. It feeds souls, including mine. All my love, R. He'd planned this delivery 3 years in advance, never doubting I would reach this milestone, never imagining the journey that would transform what the painting now meant. I hung it immediately in the entryway where everyone who entered would see it, not a decoration, but a declaration. Looking at that serene kitchen scene, I thought about the many forms of justice. There was legal justice, financial justice, public justice, all necessary, all part of my story now. But there was also this quieter justice, the reclamation of self, the restoration of voice, the recognition of worth. They had asked me to help in the kitchen, thinking it was where I belonged, small, contained, invisible. They hadn't realized they were right about one thing. The kitchen was where I belonged, not as their servant, but as the keeper of heritage, the creator of nourishment, the heart of true family. It was where I had always been strongest. It was where finally I had found my way home. Standing alone in my kitchen, my true kitchen, with evening light streaming through windows I had chosen, I whispered to Richard's memory, to my younger self, to all the invisible women watching my story unfold. They asked me to help in the kitchen, so I cooked up justice, served with dignity, and kept the best portions for myself.